Well, welcome everyone. I think we'll have a few more people kind of trickling in here. My name is Erica Clark and I'm from Shenango County. I'm a 4-H educator. I've been out to the game farm before and met our host tonight, Evan Wells here. He is our manager of the game farm. It's a really neat spot to go if you get the chance to go there. And we've had some of our 4-Hers raise pheasants. I've raised pheasants here and I think it's a really neat program. So I'm glad you guys have all signed on tonight. So Evan, I'm gonna pass it over to you if you are ready and I'll keep admitting people.
Yep, absolutely. So first I want to say thank you, Erica, for putting this together. It's great to kind of reach so many people at once over, the broad spectrum of the internet. It certainly makes things a little bit easier for people trying to get to meetings and this and that. So thank you. And as Erica said, I'm the manager out at the New York State DEC Reynolds Game Farm. And so we're a pheasant propagation facility ran by the Department of Environmental Conservation. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of the history of pheasants, a little bit of what we do and some of the programs that we offer, and in particular the day-old chick program, and hit on some of the things that folks might not be aware of on how to properly raise pheasants. Certainly it seems like we got a lot of folks on here that are familiar with poultry and chickens, and the process is pretty similar, but there's a little bit of subtleties that pheasants require over your standard poultry. So we're going to get into some of that, but also a little bit more on my background. I enjoy doing these things, especially when it involves any type of 4-H participation. I grew up myself heavily involved in 4-H and actually participated in the day-old chick program myself when I was younger through Columbia County's 4-H program and the day-old chick program. So with that, it's kind of nice to come full circle and start talking and promoting the program to other folks whose shoes ever once in. So let's see, I'm gonna try. So I hit the share screen button, Erica. Awesome. So we did a test run, but I'm still a little rusty with some things, so bear with me, guys.
While you're opening that, if we could just do a little housekeeping, if everyone can keep muted during his presentation, and then we will follow with questions at the end, and I will kind of monitor the chat, and people can also ask questions out loud too.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm going to try to do as thorough of a job explaining everything as I can, but yeah, certainly if there's ends up being some questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. Let's see. All right. So now, Erica, are you guys seeing the title slide for the PowerPoint?
Yes.
All right. Awesome. So let's see. So that's a picture of our farm there in the winter a couple of years ago. That's one of our breeder flocks. We've got 2 different varieties of ringneck pheasants on the farm here. But first I want to talk a little bit about the ringneck pheasant and its history in the United States and in New York. So first off, and kind of the big question that we always get a lot is, hey, it's a Chinese ringneck is the name of this bird. So was it originally from the US? How did it get here? Is it invasive? We hear a lot about species that come in from other countries that can do harm out on our landscape. And so the bird was introduced, and there's still a native bird in Asia. There's a lot of different varieties of pheasants, mostly from the Asian continent. And so this was brought first to America back in the late 1800s. And they had done a release down on Eastern Long Island, a place called Gardiner's Island. And the popularity of this bird just took off immensely soon after release. And so they started to expand releases elsewhere into central New York, western New York, upstate New York. And at that time, the habitat was right that the birds seemed to take hold. They reproduced naturally. Hunters and sportsmen, the birds made great table fare. They were fun to go out and hunt. Everybody just enjoyed seeing them out there as well. As we all know, those roosters have just beautiful plumage to them. And so we had our first hunting season established in 1908. And with that, we had the first game farm started down in Sherburne, which is now a DEC Environmental Education Center, which I really recommend folks go and check out. A lot of neat history there and some good trails and interpretive exhibits. But over the years, there were as many as 12 different game farms, and spread all over New York State. There were some up near the Canadian border. There were some down on Long Island, our farm in Ithaca as well. And then through the years, we kind of streamlined production, made it a little bit more efficient with less facilities, until for a while there was two main game farms that were in operation: the Reynolds Game Farm and the John White Game Farm out in Western New York. And then it was in the late 90s that they closed the John White Game Farm down and kept our farm here, the Reynolds Game Farm. And another thing I'll fill you in on too, a lot of times we get questions as to why it's called Reynolds Game Farm. So the manager of the facility for a very long time, his name was Dick Reynolds, and he really had a lot to do with kind of the game bird grower industry. The term we use for growing game birds is propagation. So he was instrumental on game bird propagation, with that developing nutrition standards and growth rates, and a lot of important work pertaining to raising pheasants. So I think it was in the late 80s that they renamed the farm. It was previously known as just the Ithaca Game Farm, and they dedicated it to him, the Reynolds Game Farm. So but with that, even though we had all those wild populations and pheasants were doing great on the landscape, but they were still just such a popular game bird that we continued to supplement those populations to provide some additional harvest opportunity for the sportsmen and women out there. And so with that, that's what the purpose of those 12 game farms were doing. We started the day-old chick program. It was officially recognized in 1919, so the program's slightly over 100 years old, and it originated as just extra eggs from the game farms were distributed to farmers, and they'd put them under their broody chickens out in the barns. Chickens would hatch them out. The hen would raise the young pheasants for a little while, and then eventually the pheasants would disperse. And so that's been going for a while. And then later on, we transitioned into just supplying the chicks. But I do like to point out, if anybody's interested in eggs or an incubation project, we certainly can facilitate that. If that's something that you're more interested in learning more about, kind of the growth of the embryo and the egg and the hatching process and incubation. So keep that in mind. But so yeah, we had very strong populations, but we were still always supplementing what was out there. And populations really peaked in the late 1960s. We had over 500,000 birds harvested by over 250,000 hunters. And it was soon after that that we started to see our populations decline. And with that, we wanted to find out why and what was happening and going on with that. So we launched a lot of studies, and over the years, we've had over 30 different ones just looking into why pheasant populations have declined. Is it something to do with the habitat, predation, which is other animals eating the pheasants, home range, how far were they going when we did release them or when they were in an area? And we tried a lot of other things on the propagation side to mitigate that loss as well. So we had tried some different breeds of pheasants. And a lot of these answer a lot of questions that we still currently get at the farm here is, hey, maybe you guys should try a different variety of pheasant, or maybe it would be better if you had wild pheasants. And we've been down all those roads through the years, and we've gone as far as, I've got an article from the late 1960s where DEC staff actually went over to Korea and harvested wild eggs from the mountains out there, brought the eggs back and incubated them at the farm here. And so you couldn't get a more wild bird than that, but it still didn't seem to change much in the grand scheme of things. So after all these studies, what did we kind of end up finding out as the large issue was? Well, we found out that it wasn't a matter of the hens not laying eggs anymore or not being fertile. They were still having success with that. Releasing those different strains didn't seem to have an impact on it either. It wasn't like the wild versus the propagated pheasant made any large difference. And that's something that we see in our flocks here too. If you ever come for a tour, you'll notice you walk up to the pens, the birds still push and want to get away from you. If a hawk flies over the pens, they squawk their alarm call and they'll kind of go on the defense of it. And in the springtime, our hens still get broody. We collect the eggs every day for the sake of our purposes, but if those hens were left alone, they would want to sit and hatch out that clutch of eggs. But another thing that we tried back through the early 90s was this program called the Young Pheasant Release Program, where instead of distributing day-old chicks, which we were still doing, but some landowners also had the option to get young pheasants from us. So they were 8-week-old birds that we had raised at the farm. And then they'd set a pen up in the right habitat for them, give them a few weeks like that, open the doors, do kind of a soft release where the birds were adapted to the area. And unfortunately, through some we'd put bans on those birds, and then hunters would call in with birds they harvested in the fall to let us know the band number. And through that, we can kind of find out information on how many might be living still out there. And again, that kind of did not have great success in increasing the success of the wild population or bringing it back up to where it once was. Additionally, we had high mortality from predators. So we had done some studies with backpack telemetry units so that we could track the pheasants and see where they were going, and would send us a different signal if the bird had died. And with that, we were finding that a lot of birds were dying from predation. Some of that on account of trapping pressure wasn't quite what it used to be. There used to be a lot more trappers harvesting predators from the landscape, and some of that has diminished over the years. But the real big answer to it all was habitat. The habitat had changed for pheasants over the years. With that, a variety of factors such as land use, ag practices, kind of everything had changed, not for the better for pheasants in our area. So with that, we saw a lot of suburban sprawl. We all know what happens when land values change and become worth more for certain uses than others. Also, just over that time span, if we think of from the 60s to today, where we're talking a period of almost 70 years, that is a huge period for just our whole landscape across New York to change. And so a lot of what used to be grassland or hayfield or, you know, even just vacant fallow land now started to revert back to woodland. And the way I like to kind of point out this one to folks today is that we see a large increase in our black bear populations and our fisher populations. And a lot of that population growth is due to that habitat change. So as New York State is becoming more woody and forested, that benefits those species, but it doesn't benefit species such as the pheasant and other grassland birds. So, and ag practices had changed. And, you know, certainly I grew up on a dairy farm, so I'm not anti-ag by any means, but some of the older practices had a little bit more waste grains, and there was a little bit more small grain farming across New York on a small scale. Field consolidation kind of just led to a little bit easier picking for those birds to be for predators and predation. Also, our hay fields, you know, our alfalfa and haylage fields, where we used to back in the day maybe get 2, maybe 3 cuttings. Now it's 3, 4 on the best of years. Sometimes folks will squeeze out 5 cuttings. So a lot of just kind of land use changes through time. Another program, so when we talk about like all these ag changes, well, there's big ag out west and we have strong pheasant numbers out west. So, you know, how does some of that correlate? But so there's a program through the United States Farm Bill that's called the CRP, Conservation Reserve Program. And this is where farmers and landowners can get subsidized and get some money, some payments from the government to not farm certain areas of land. And so as you can see through this map, the darker areas, the greens, the blues, that's your higher concentrations of CRP enrollment. So folks that were enrolled in the program. And then you get up in New York and you see there's not as much involvement in it. So, and there's even been studies over the years that have directly shown pheasant populations even out west to kind of correlate to that CRP enrollment. And if you have high involvement in CRP, you've got good pheasant numbers. And then if it's a year where crops might be bringing more than that subsidy, pheasant numbers will decline a little bit with that. So, and again, just by our land use and habitat types through the northeast, you don't see as much of that CRP enrollment and involvement. So with all that dismal news about pheasants and how they're, gone and disappearing, why are we, still messing with them? And the fact of the matter is that pheasants, again, although non-native, they really blossomed as a game bird across the country. And they are pretty much the #1 game bird across the United States today. So non-native, but they weren't invasive. They haven't outcompeted native wildlife. It's not like they've exploded like we hear stories of Asian carp, getting into our waterways and doing a lot of harm to our native species. Pheasants kind of filled a niche on the landscape that wasn't ever really there, so it didn't displace much. And with that, we've got a lot of small game hunters in New York. There's still thousands of pheasant hunters in New York, and there's hundreds of thousands across the country. So pheasant hunting is still incredibly popular with folks. It's a great way to get youth involved in hunting in the outdoors. I always pitch it, and I grew up as a small game hunter, a pheasant hunter. I always found it a lot more fun than deer hunting. I didn't have to freeze my toes off in a deer stand. I got to walk through a field on a nice sunny October afternoon. With that, also, anybody that's ever gone out, getting to see a dog work and pursue pheasants is almost as much fun as harvesting a bird itself, watching those dogs work and kind of figure out and learn things about the birds as they're out there. The programs that we offer, like the Day-Old Chick program, it's just a great way to kind of bridge youth and the outdoors and animal husbandry and kind of meld all that together. And so a lot of that can be geared kind of towards the sportsman, but for those that don't hunt, I also like to pitch that, there's kind of a bigger message behind why we're here. So we're here because of the loss of that habitat. So even if you're not a pheasant hunter, look at us as we're here because that habitat on a whole is decreasing. And so there's a lot more species than just pheasants that are affected by that loss in their habitat. This is a couple of them here. We've got the northern harrier, which is the hawk there on the side. Up top, we've got a bobolink, and down the yellow and blackbird is a eastern meadowlark. Those are all grassland species that have been on the decline over the years. So some of the things that we do here through the DEC's pheasant propagation program is we do adult bird distribution. So we raise anywhere from about 35,000. This past year, we did almost 39,000 adult birds. And these are birds that we grow on the farm to about 18 to 22 weeks of age. And then they get released all across New York State on lands that are accessible to hunters. And that's public information. We want folks to know where we're putting the birds out so that they can have an opportunity to go and harvest some of those. And it's just a great opportunity for folks that might not have access to private land to hunt or just land in general. These birds are put out on all properties that are 100% public accessible. So, but then the real cream of the crop, what we're all here for, is the Day-Old Chick program. So again, with this program, it's just I'm a big believer, I think it's some of my agricultural and 4-H roots. Just involvement with animal husbandry is a great thing for youth in general, and not only youth, adults, everybody. And it gives you an opportunity to see one of our wild species kind of up close and kind of play a role in its production. You get to learn a little bit about their biology and habitat, and you can really form it into other things, especially if you're going to be involved through 4-H. There's endless possibilities for independent projects, different projects at the fair. I was one of the first kids to end up bringing pheasants to my county fair, and so that's something that you can do, and I'm more than happy to work with kids on getting, I say ducks in a row, but I mean pheasants, in terms of sometimes you just need to set up cages a little different and things like that. But then secondly, if you're a sportsman or woman who enjoys pheasant hunting, it's an opportunity to get out there in the fall and hunt some birds, enjoy the delicious, nutritious meat that they can provide for us. So eligibility in the program, there are certain parameters that we just want to make sure that folks are meeting. And it's not so much just to kind of put a bunch of rules out there, but just so that we're making sure that the birds are getting the right conditions that they need so that they can be raised healthy and in the right conditions. So some of those things that we're going to go over tonight is the brooder. And a brooder, for those that don't know, if you've ever raised chicks, it's just an area where you're going to have those chicks. They're safe from getting too cold. That you got a heat source for them, food, water, just kind of provide protection for them while they need it. Then with pheasants, we want a flight pen, which is, there's different varying degrees of what you can build for that. And I'm going to go into some of that with you guys. And often if you have an old chicken coop with a chicken run off the side, that will suit them just fine. And I'll tell you some things to kind of adapt it to pheasants, but it just gives the birds a little bit bigger area to kind of exercise their wings and get acclimated to that outdoor weather. Another thing that you're going to need to have lined up is a release site. So any of these birds that we're raising through the program, since it's a DEC program, the farm is completely funded through the New York State Conservation Fund, which is an allocation of licensed dollars from hunting and fishing and trapping license sales. And so these birds, you need to then release them later in the season. So if you weren't participating in the program and wanted pheasants, you'd want to go out and get a game bird breeder license, which is something I can certainly walk folks through, and it's not very difficult. But by participating in the Dale Chick program, you're exempt from needing that game bird breeder license. You have to release the birds anytime after 8 weeks old. That just ensures that those birds are fully feathered, acclimated to the outdoors. A lot of people are you're gonna keep your birds until 16 to 22 weeks is usually what most people do. That's when you've got that mature pheasant that you think of when you see a pheasant out on landscape. But certainly with these days and age of high feed prices, some folks will want to get those birds out a little bit sooner, younger. Additionally, some of our school programs, they'll release them on the earlier side because then they don't necessarily have to take care of them through the summer when the students are out. So anytime after 8 weeks old is perfectly fine. And we've got the application is up on our website. Just Google search NYS DEC Day Old Chick application. And I'm actually going to kind of roll through the process with you in a little while here after we go through some of the other things. So some of the stuff I want to hit on tonight for producing the birds and making sure they've got everything they need to grow up happy and healthy is we're going to go over the brooder, some food, water requirements, best way to heat them, the flight pen, and protecting them from some of the things such as weather, predators, disease. So first thing is the brooder house. And so this is a picture inside of one of our nurseries. And inside that ring, I think there's probably about 1,200 chicks, which I always kind of tell everybody, raising 30 chicks or raising 3,000 chicks is pretty much the exact same. It's all just a matter of scale. So, you know, we've got a little bit more intricate facilities, but really you just want to make sure that you've got something that is kind of containing the chicks. Sometimes for the first week or so, if you're only doing 15 or 20 chicks, I recommend you can just set up a storage tote, you know, and bed some shavings in the bottom of that, hang your heat lamp over the top, and that kind of keeps them contained. Pheasants are pretty good at flying even as young little chicks. So by the time they get to be about a week old, so we've got that metal ring up around and that contains them to the heat source. So the heat source in our brooders are the little gray triangular units that you see hanging, the long lines. And we just don't want the chicks getting too far away from that heat source. And so if you had a section of an old barn or an old chicken coop and you had young chicks in there, for the first week, you're going to want to try and keep them a little bit closer to the heat source. And you can do that with, excuse me, you can do that with, this is aluminum flashing, but you can use just some old plywood or again, putting them in that storage tote, and don't give them full run of that room for the first week. So they don't get too far away and get chilled. They don't need a ton of room, kind of as they grow is how you're going to expand that out. But and you want to make sure the chicks have fresh air, but not a draft. You don't want to chill them. They're pretty fragile when they're very young. They can get cold quickly. They're not good at self-regulating their body temperature. Another thing you want to watch in the brooder area is that it's not overly bright. So pheasants are real prone to picking, and that's one of the differences between chickens and pheasants. And anybody that's raised chickens knows that even chickens will pick, and that can be an issue. But pheasants are a lot, that problem can be a lot worse. So we actually don't want it overly bright in the nursery area because that can encourage picking. So if you have like a big window in the chicken coop or something, we recommend you can just put a little bit of like painter's plastic up over it just to make it translucent. So it's not as bright, but you're still letting a little bit of sunlight in. Bedding for the chicks, you try to stay away from sawdust because the young chicks can sometimes confuse it with the feed and they'll kind of ingest it. So we like to use shavings. Some people have used chopped straw and that works good. Now, if all you have access to is sawdust, that's okay. I just recommend that usually you find an old towel or something to put down for the first 5 days to a week. Usually after that, the chicks figure it out pretty quick as to what's feed and what's not. But when they're young, they can sometimes confuse it and eat the sawdust. So again, you want to provide a heat source for the chicks. And what I like best and works good for the majority of the home production out there is just those red lamp heat bulbs, which I don't know, Erica, can they see me on the video screen? All right. So one of these guys right here that you just get at Tractor Supply. One of these will do about certainly 30 chicks. You can learn to read the chicks. You always want to make sure that you secure this good because it could be a fire hazard. So I like to hang them up with a little bit of chain or those heavy duty plastic zip ties on the chain just as a extra security that doesn't fall. But you're going to want to keep that brood area about 95 degrees for the first week. And you can start to lower it after that by about 5 degrees each week. Another important thing is to make sure you turn that brooder on and that heat lamp on before you get the chicks. You don't want to bring your chicks home, put them into that brood area, and then turn that lamp on because all that litter, the nursery shavings, is going to be pretty cold, and all the bedding and everything in there is going to be too cold for the chicks. So try to preheat that. The best thing to do, I say 95 degrees, and that's a good rule of thumb, but it's really best to kind of learn to read the chicks. So if they're cold, they're just going to huddle up completely underneath it, and they're just going to be in a little tight mass. Versus if they're too hot, they're going to push to the very outside edge of that brood area. But what you want to look for is that those birds are nice and comfortable, and they'll do two things when they're comfortable. They're either going to be in a donut shape underneath that light, which is just kind of perfectly spread out underneath the ring that the light makes, or they might just be kind of randomly placed through the brood house, and that means they're comfortable as well. And to adjust the temperature of the brooder lamp, you're going to want to move it up. If it's too hot, you'd move it up to cool it. And if it's too cold, you'd move the lamp down to put that heat source closer to them. And so that's why I like hanging them on chain link, because then I can just change a couple links and make that higher or lower. So in this picture here, you can see on the left, aside from my two little boys that are terrorizing the chicks that you might be able to see. So you can tell that the chicks are too cold in that because they're actually all huddled right up under that heat source. So with that, shortly after, I'm sure I went over, adjusted the thermostat on our brooder units and made that a little bit warmer. The picture on the right is what you typically see for the home setup that you're maybe going to do 25 or 30 chicks in. There's that red lamp hanging. And if you're going to do more chicks than that, you just add additional heat lamps and kind of space them out. So feed is one of the areas that can be a little different than our standard chicken feed. So when you go to the store and you get a chick feed, that's going to be a 21% protein most of the time for a chick starter. But pheasants need a lot higher protein, and they've got very fragile bones that grow fast, and so we need the proper nutrition. So with that, you want to ask your local feed store for a turkey or game bird starter. And with that, it's going to be 26 to, whoops. Sorry, I'm getting distracted here. So a 26 to 30% protein, I really would prefer nothing under 28%, but if all you can get is 26%, the chicks will probably be fine. Additionally, a question that comes up a lot too is you hear about medicated chick feed or non-medicated chick feed. We strongly suggest the medicated, which has amprolium typically. And so that is the amprolium is a coccidiostat. So that's gonna safeguard the chicks against a small intestinal parasite that they kind of all have. It's just usually tried to control in low enough numbers that it doesn't cause any issues. Sometimes this can be hard to find nowadays. They've changed the rules with how we medicate our feeds. And so technically amprolium is not an antibiotic. So it's not banned from our feeds without a prescription like some of our other antibiotics are. But some feed stores misinterpret that and don't carry the medicated feeds. So in some areas it can be hard to find. And if you can't get a hold of it, it's not the end of the world. People certainly do raise birds on the unmedicated feed, but you just want to take a little bit of extra precaution to make sure that chick's bedding is staying clean. And sometimes what you can do is after the first week, just add another little layer of fresh shavings on top, and maybe do that about once a week. Just top dress the shavings with some clean ones, just to minimize ingestion of the manure by chicks. So then they're going to be on that starter for the first 8 weeks. And then after that, they're going to go on a grower ration from 8 to 14 weeks. And that's going to drop that protein level down. And the good news is each time you go to a lower protein rate, the feed gets cheaper. So, you know, usually the protein content is one of the pricier items in the feed. So as the birds get older and get on those lower protein rates, the feed costs go down. But you feed a grower ration, which is 20 to 22% till about 14 weeks. And again, if you're going to release them prior to this, you know, certainly just feed them the ration that they're supposed to have up until then. So if you were going to release them at 8 weeks, just give them that starter ration until you do end up letting them out. Naturally, they get their protein through ingestion of insects mostly, because they're a very high protein source out in the wild. Then if you have them beyond the 14, you're going to give them a finisher ration. And so that's a 16 to 18% protein mix. And for all these, if you just go to your local feed store and tell them that you're raising pheasants, raising game birds, they're going to walk you right through your feed needs as well. And they should be pretty darn similar to what I've got up here. One way to save a little bit of money on feed is the last 2 weeks before you're putting birds out, you can drop them onto a scratch mix, which is a cracked corn and usually a rolled oats mixture. And the birds will be perfectly fine to sustain on that. And it kind of cuts the feed bill down a little bit more for you. So with all of our feed, we always want to make sure that it doesn't spoil. So store that in a trash can, metal trash can, or a plastic trash can. That's also going to help keep the mice out, any excessive moisture that could cause molding and then cause further disease issues. There we go. Feeder space. So again, it's kind of, you know, we assign values to it, but it's really, I hate to say, just kind of a common sense thing. You know, you don't need to provide a ton of space, but you do want to ensure that there is adequate space for them. So a good rule of thumb is, you know, 1 inch per chick for the first 3 weeks. And as you can see in the picture here, what we've got some paper feed trays down. And so the chicks are going to be on that in our nurseries for the first week. And then in the background, you can kind of see some silver cylindrical things. And once those chicks are a week old, we bring in, those are just some gravity feeders. Each one holds about 30 pounds. And the feed just drops through and it's in a tray in the bottom that the chicks can access. Beyond that, we shoot for about 3 inches per bird. We try to keep chicks out of the feed, you know, granted in the setup that we use, they're in there scratching around and stuff, but at home, it can help minimize some of the waste if you use some of like the chick troughs with the little reels on top that they can't get in and really feed it around, kick it around. And, you know, I always push with the program, things can be as intricate as you like, or you can keep it as simple as you want. So while you can purchase feeders, there's a variety of different things you can do just for homemade. If you have just a couple chicks, you can tear the top off an egg crate and feed them out of the bottom of the egg carton. If you've got just a handful of chicks, I've used the top of plastic jars before, and you just put a little feed in that. These work pretty good too. This is just like what you'd buy at Agway. And so that's a little feeder, comes with the plastic thing that you can screw on there. And then this guard is nice because it prevents the chicks from getting in and scratching it all out. Another thing I've done too, when I was raising birds on my own, was I just cut about the bottom 8 inches off of a 5-gallon bucket and then just throw a scoop of feed in that. And that worked great. And then I just had these little homemade plywood triangular shelters. And I'd toss the bucket under that, and that would help keep the rain off it so it wouldn't spoil once the birds were outside. So there's just a couple pictures of some of the commercial options out there. I really like anything that kind of stores feed up at the top and then allows it to come down. That just helps so you don't have to feed them as often, especially when they're out in the flight pen. You know, you might only need to top that feeder off every few days as opposed to, you know, every day. But again, hey, if it saves you some cash, that 5-gallon bucket trick works pretty good. And just got to give them an extra scoop every day. On their drinkers, same thing with just raising chicks. You know, those 1-gallon drinkers work great. One thing we recommend with the pheasants, they're a lot smaller than chicks that you're going to get, you know, standard size poultry. So we usually, you can actually purchase a game bird drinker, which has a lot narrower trough. Those work great, but that's kind of a special order thing. If you just go to Agway or Tractor Supply, get your standard drinker, just put some stones in it for the first week. And that's gonna not let those chicks get in it, because if they get into the trough, they're gonna get chilled. And sometimes they might have a hard time recovering from that and you might lose some. When you receive the chicks, we recommend if you throw a tablespoon of sugar in that water for the first day or two, that just helps the chicks get over any little extra stresses they might have from shipping. It's not a necessity, but it kind of helps. So, and it certainly doesn't do any harm to the chicks. Just with any animal, you want to make sure you're giving them fresh water daily, especially in the brooder house and in those gallon jugs. That water can get kind of stagnant, you know, with the heat of it being 95 degrees. So fresh water every day is good. And again, you know, the world's your oyster with just using your imagination to think up whatever you want for just holding some water. A lot of things nowadays, I think you can get in Tractor Supply, the little nipple kits that you just put on the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket. And those work really good. Even the little chicks can figure those out. So we use in our nurseries. You didn't see in those pictures are older pictures that I had up before, but now we've got multiple 10-foot long PVC pipes that have those little nipple drinkers on it. And from 1 day old, those chicks just start to drink out of it just like a guinea pig would. You know, they go up, they hit the little actuator ball in it and the water dribbles out. And that's something you can hang those in your flight pen too as the birds get older, and they'll continue to remember how to use that. And that's just a picture of that there. So that the one on the left, that's the 5-gallon bucket with those little nipples that you can get and install. And then the one on the right is the commercial 1-gallon fount. And that's the 1-gallon fount with that game bird or quail lip on it. But again, if it's a standard one, that's fine. Just put rocks in there for the first week. After the first week, the chicks are pretty good about figuring out not to climb in it and make too much of a mess. So if you've got an old dog house or chicken coop, you know, you might have like a run or some outside access attached to it. And after the birds are about 3 weeks old, you can start to let them out and let them kind of acclimate to the weather. Our nursery, it's not a necessity. Our nurseries, they don't have the outside run off of that. But it is nice. It does kind of help them harden up a little bit before they do go out. Yeah, one thing you got to watch out for is that you're not going to let those young birds out on a very cold or a damp or rainy night or day, because that can lead to chilling, which could lead to some mortalities. And then usually after you do it a couple times, they'll figure it out and kind of go back in on their own at night. But you are going to want to go out there at dusk and just make sure they've all gotten back in and close the access off so they can't come back out. And again, you'd want to close that access anyways, just to protect them from predators too, in case a predator gets into the run at night, it couldn't access the coop. And then once the birds hit 6 weeks old, they can pretty much go out after that. They don't really need a heat source after 4 weeks. When you do move them, you just want to, again, watch the weather and try and put them out in a nice sunny, warm stretch. And so this is some of our birds out in the flight pen. So these are birds that 5 to 6 weeks old that we took out of our nursery and put into the flight pen. And you can see here in the picture that these guys, they've got, kind of hard to tell, but some little blue sunglasses on in the right, and the birds on the left have little brown sunglasses. So those are called specs or peepers or blinders. And so we put those on the birds when we take them from the nursery out into the flight pen. So typically we're not going to handle those birds again once they go into the flight pen. So we use that opportunity for moving them from the nursery to the outside to put those on. And what they do is they help with that picking. You know, again, like I said, pheasants pick a lot worse than chickens. So those blinders kind of help with that. I like to tease that it plays off their short attention span. You know, they see their buddy on the side of them, they want to pick at it and kind of fight with them. Then they look straight on, they can't see him and they forget all about him. I don't know if that's the truth behind it, but that's what I like to believe. So we do recommend that. And space requirements is a big difference for the pheasants. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But your chickens, 2 square feet per bird. But pheasants, if they're going out in the flight pen and you're going to keep them beyond like 12 weeks, they're going to need 25 square feet per bird. And that's with the blinders on. If they don't have those blinders on, we recommend 35 square feet per bird. And you can find those through Amazon. They're very basic to install on the birds. Certainly, you can always call us out here at the farm and we'll kind of walk with you a little bit more on it and give you some more info on it. And if you're in a bind, you know, if it's a 4-H kid and it's a matter of just participating or not, hey, we've got lots at the farm. We'd be happy to send a little baggie of them out to you to put on your birds. But the number one call that we get from folks raising them is, hey, my birds have no tails. What's going on? Usually when they don't grow those tails, they're picking. And it typically comes down to the space requirement. It just wasn't quite what it should have been for those birds. So again, once they're done in the brooder house, you can send them to the flight pens, or again, like I said, if you've got a chicken coop with a chicken run off it, that will work just fine as well. You can make it super basic or just use with materials that you have around, but pretty much you're just looking to keep the pheasants in and keep the predators out. When you take those birds out, again, you're just going to want to move them on nice weather. If you see the weather forecast is, it's going to be chilly and it's going to pour 3 inches of rain, hold the birds in the nursery another week and wait until you've got, 3-4 days of some nice clear weather to put them on. Again, I kind of hit on the space requirements already and the installation of the specs on the birds. So what I did when I was younger to build my flight pen was I just scrounged up a handful of, I think my pen was about half metal T-posts and half wooden posts that I rallied up and pulled out of the weeds somewhere. Height isn't a big deal. You just want to make it so it's comfortable when you're in there walking and working with the birds. So with that, 4 to 6 feet is usually nice, but certainly if it's just 3 feet on the sides, that's fine. You just got to hunch over a little more when you're in there. For the chicken wire, I prefer a 1 inch, and that's most what you'll buy these days. There's not much other than that, but some places will sell 1.5 inch or 2 inch, and that's kind of pushing it for those young birds might slip out until they're 7 weeks old. They might be able to squeak through that. As well as predators, it's easier for them to get in. And mainly when I say that, it's mink. Mink can slip through 1.5 inch hole, no problem. So we want to do everything we can to prevent them getting in. And when you put your chicken wire out, and this is a good idea, even if you just have regular chickens, to overlap that chicken wire to the outside, lay that 12 to 18 inches of extra chicken wire on the ground towards the outside of the pen. And so what that'll do is when a predator comes and it just kind of instinctively hits the edge of that pen and wants to start digging, it's just going to hit the chicken wire and won't get under it. Ideally too, you can dig it into the ground. That's what we do here with our pens on the farm. But to keep things a little bit simpler and less labor for folks doing it at home, you can just overlap it. Attaching the chicken wire to the post, I always like zip ties, or you can go to the hardware store and get a roll of that metal wire. that they use for tying concrete rebar together, and just attach it to it with that. A lot of places now are selling the PVC coated wire. That lasts a lot longer than today's galvanized wire. It tends to rot out after a few more years. So that's kind of worth a couple extra dollars if you can swing it when you're building your pen. For pheasants, they can fly a lot harder and faster than chickens. So with that, we really recommend flight netting as opposed to just chicken wire on top. Flight netting is kind of a knotted nylon product, and it's a lot softer. So when the birds fly up into it, they don't risk hurting themselves. Sometimes with your regular chicken wire, they can do a lot of damage to themselves when they fly up. So, and again, to attach that, you can use zip ties, wire, string. There's these little metal rings called hog rings. They're more for upholstery these days than I think actually ringing hogs, but those work great. And really, we just rely on the pressure of the net, stretching it down over the side of the chicken wire, and that ring holds it on. So then that netting will sag a little bit. And plus, it's an easy way to just give you some extra room in the flight pen. Take a 2x4 and stand it up in the middle of the pen, and that's going to kind of give it that tented effect and give you a little bit more room in there. Just any type of door to get in to give the birds food and water, catch them when it's time to release them. Pheasants are a little bit more of a, you think your chickens are nuts, wait till you have pheasants. They're a little bit more kind of spastic, and always worried something's going to eat them. So we try to provide as much cover as we can to them in the pens. And so here we're managing for certain plant species like goldenrod, aster, lamb's quarter, things like that. You want just as thick as you can in there so that the birds just feel safe. If they don't have a clear view of the sky, they're going to feel nice and safe. But in the home chicken run, if you can snag some old brush out of the hedgerow, old Christmas tree that you might have thrown out back, anything like that works good. And it reduces stress, because stress typically ends up leading to picking in the birds. So another thing that the cover does is gives them a little bit of a break from heavy rains or the really blaring hot days in the sun. So, and if your pen doesn't have cover, you can even just, what I did when I was younger is I just round up some scrap plywood and just made little triangular shelters, and the birds would go in that, and it would kind of keep them content. So again, we just want to keep the birds in and stuff that wants to eat the birds out. This is a picture of a commercial flight pen here, but everything here just applies to the home as well. You'd just be doing it on kind of a smaller scale. So you can see there, they got the wooden fence posts with PVC chicken wire, the flight netting over top. Now, flight netting can be one of the pricier things of getting into having pheasants. You can buy smaller chunks online, which help. Another thing you can do if you've got some other folks interested in getting pheasants is go in on it together and kind of share cost. Sometimes out at the farm here in Ithaca, we've got some extra chunks that, hey, we replaced the whole flight pen and it's kind of too old and no good for us, but that was a 200 by 250 foot pen versus there's probably something usable for somebody that needs a 30 by 50 foot thing. So we're planning on taking a pen down this spring, so we should have some leftover netting from that. So folks can feel free to reach out to us and try and line something up with that. But again, all this stuff applies on the home base as well. So, and this is just some of the pictures. Again, those plants I was speaking of. So on the right there, the yellow one, we've got goldenrod. On the left, we've got lamb's quarter. Now, if any of you guys are gardeners or farmers, you probably really hate lamb's quarter because it's pretty annoying and it grows no matter what, and it grows fast and it reseeds. And that's why we like it for pheasant cover in our flight pens, because you don't have to do much to it. It just grows, and it grows with a lot of stems. It grows with a lot of leaves, and it makes for really some real good cover for the birds. Side note, it's also edible. So if you're growing that in your pen or the garden, you'll never go hungry. I did see the quick question there about if you're doing this through the day-old chick program or through any of our programs, do you need to report it on your annual report for your game bird breeder license? And the answer to that is no. It's a completely separate entity. Birds that you're doing through your game bird breeder license is separate from anything that you're going to get through us in the day-old chick program. So participating in the program, you do want to make sure you have a good release site. You know, you're not doing the birds any justice by cutting them loose into a 50-acre hardwood patch. It just doesn't have the cover that the birds need to feel safe. And honestly, they're going to move right off of that until they find the right cover, because same goes within the flight pen. How if there's not any cover, they just don't feel safe and they're stressed and want to get away from predators. Same thing's going to happen if you're releasing those birds into the wrong cover. They're just going to move and move until they find it. Or alternatively, without the good cover, they're easy prey for predators and they won't be around long either. So what we really want to see is think of, you know, wetland, grassland, tall. If that bird is a needle in a haystack out in the middle of that field, that's what is really going to be best for them. Varying cover types, because sometimes the birds will hang in one type of cover for roosting land at night, and then they'll be foraging in some stuff during the day as well. So yeah, they would need polarum testing. Our birds here are actually polarum tested annually as well. Since we're doing breed stock, we participate in the National Poultry Improvement Program. And with that, our breed stock gets annually tested. And yeah, that's pheasants get tested just like chickens for the fairs. So this is another, I really like this picture of cover, because to me, like, that just screams pheasants, and pheasants are going to live. You know, ideally, if you've got acreage that has just been fallow and hasn't been mowed in 5-6 years, and it's starting to revert back to a little bit of brushy and scrubby, but not quite full on young woods yet, that's great. You know, it just gives those birds lots of places to kind of forage and mill around for seeds and insects, while providing protection from predators. So poor sites, a lot of times people see cornfields and they think pheasants, but if you get in that cornfield, there's a couple different aspects to the cornfield. You know, if we get in that field and down at a low level, it's wide open underneath the kind of understory. So while they've got good protection from above from hawks and owls, really on the ground side of things, coyotes, fox, all those are going to find them pretty quick. Again, woods are no good. Empty field, I say empty field in terms of like a freshly mowed field. So it's very short, doesn't have good cover and protection for those birds. So, and this is just another, you know, again, alfalfa field before it's cut, looks wonderful, you know, but if you cut your birds out or release your birds out and then they come through and mow 3 days later, it's not going to be so hot for them. So when we release, we can release on private land, we can release on public land. I am a big fan of releasing on some of the state sites where we're already releasing our adult birds. Those are, you know, we know they're good sites that have been selected by our regional DEC staff. Another thing that comes up is folks will think, oh, I've got this chunk of state forest, you know, hey, I'm sending the application to the DEC wildlife staff, it should be no problem. Not always the case. So there's different management aspects of state forest land versus our wildlife management area land. And so the wildlife management areas are typically what I'm kind of pushing for folks to choose for release sites. It's going to require typically the minimal amount of permissions. But certainly you can reach out to your wildlife office to kind of get some of those permissions before starting your application. And so I've got this map up here, which is a good kind of statewide map of who you'd end up contacting in your DEC region, in your county or jurisdiction, for questions pertaining to release sites. So, and you guys can reach out to these contacts as well. If you don't have a release site in mind, maybe you really want to raise birds, but just not sure where you're going to put them. Reach out to these offices, even reach out to myself at the farm, and we'll work with you to make sure that we can find a good site that suits your needs. And so we can also release on private lands, but now through the program, the birds are going out on lands that are going to be open and accessible to pheasant hunters in the fall, which again, that can be private property. And that private landowner doesn't need to grant permission for deer hunting or turkey hunting or bunnies or squirrels or anything else. But they would have to allow access for pheasant hunters. With that, there's certain regulations, stipulations you can put in place to just kind of feel like, hey, you're not completely opening the doors. And that can be things like, you know, maybe only X amount of hunters at a time, or that they need to call and, you know, kind of check in with you before they go. And we do want to, we're going to end up having some point of contact out there just for sportsmen and sportswomen to reach out to kind of gain access and permissions. And even though the land is listed, if it's a private release site, they still do need to ask permission. They can't just come tromping on the land. They do need to, you know, stop and check in with you if that's what you'd like. And any type of those special conditions for a release site on private land, just put that in the comment section of the application. And then we've got for the private land, this is kind of a landowner consent form. And it's just something that is just helps. We actually had to do it because we had some issues with folks saying, oh, this person said I could release the birds on the land. And then we went and really, you know, they released the birds and they didn't have the landowner permission. So this is just something that's good to give to a landowner to explain about the program and what we're doing and why we're doing. And they can retain a copy. And then you're going to submit this with your application as well. So one thing I'm going to do quick, I think with you right now is I'll actually log on and show you guys, walk you through the application process. Because that's a big question that we get is just how and where to release, to apply. So bear with me 1 second while I find it.
It might be quicker if you stop sharing and then reshare.
Okay. All right, bear with me guys while I get it up here. Let's try this. Go back to my all right, I seem to have lost my screen now. Hold on. All right. I think I'm gaining. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. So I always tell folks, easiest thing is just go right to Google or, you know, your internet search browser and just type in what you're looking for, NYSDEC day-old chick application. And so with that, the link pops right up, and wait for my slow internet. There we are. And so this webpage just kind of details everything that I've talked about. We also have a downloadable chick program guide that really goes into the nitty-gritty of raising and producing pheasants and release sites and all that. And so that's a PDF that you can just click on right there and read through. Additionally, we've got the link. If the day-old chick program isn't for you and you just want to raise pheasants on your own, we've got the link right here that would take you to the game bird breeder license page. And there's a Class B license that is one that is a non-commercial license. And I think it's $40 for a 5-year term on that license. And that allows you to raise pheasants as well. So again, it just kind of outlines a lot of the main points that I've spoke about. One thing to keep in mind, folks, is that the applications have to be in by March 25th. After that, the application is going to kind of turn off on the website. So this page will be still be here, but the link won't work anymore once that closes on March 25th. So another thing to do before you start the application is to fill out that landowner consent form. And so right now the application is kind of acting kind of screwy, and it wants you, even if you select state land, it wants you to attach that landowner consent form. So I've been telling folks, hey, just write on there what chunk of state property you want to try and release the birds on, attach it to the application, and then DEC staff will get in touch with you. But you click on the link there and it's going to bring you over to this. All right. And again, it gives you a link if you want to review the program guide. It talks all about some of the, how it's going to go through the approval process. Just more of those kind of points to be eligible, public pheasant hunting on the release site. It's going to go how birds are going to get to you. And it just kind of spells everything out. So you would just want to make sure that you fill out the application completely. Anything with a red asterisk is going to be required of it. So first name, last name, new application. So obviously if you did it last year, you'd be a repeat and you'd click no on that. Then for you 4-H members, we've got this box here. So if you're a 4-H member, hit yes. If you're just a member of the general public looking to raise birds in the program, click no. If you're a 4-H'er, you can enter the name of your club here. We know too that there's independent 4-H'ers, so you might not have a club name, and that's okay. Additionally, for the public, we often have sportsmen's clubs or local correctional facilities, things like that are raising birds. So you can put the name of the club in there. Number of chicks. We don't ship any less than 15, so you can't enter a value less than 15. So if your application doesn't submit, just check. That might be one of the reasons that you don't have the correct amount in there. And the reason that we do a minimum of 15 is that keeps the chick warm in shipping. If you were to try and get 3 or 5 chicks, they might get cold in delivery and you'd end up losing those. Address, all self-explanatory, phone number, email address. So brooder information. Most people are going to have one. And again, we just want this information so that we know that we're doing the best we can for the birds. And certainly if something seems off, we'll reach out to you and work with you and let you know that you're actually going to want less birds for the amount of brooder space that you have. Or hey, maybe you can even take more if you like. Number of outdoor pens. So that's in reference to your flight pens. The size of the pens. We're just collecting that again so that we know that those birds have the right amount of space. Age you're going to release the birds. Again, it's got to be greater than 8 weeks old. And also to note, birds should be released by December 1st of the year. So here we get into our release sites. And so on the release site, most people are going to have one, but some folks will have more than one release site, and that's okay. If you are going to do more than one, you're going to add one in, okay? Sometimes that can kind of trip up folks for why their application isn't going through. And if you accidentally do it, just delete it out and go back to the one. Release site location, you can just type it in, or you can also scroll through on the map and find the location. Sure, we'll go with Del Mar, why not? That was actually another old DEC game farm. That's now our pathology unit down there. So then here you're going to select what property type. So we've got state land, we've got city lands, town lands, private lands. One thing that we didn't quite cover in this was federal lands. So we've got the Finger Lakes National Forest out here. If it's going to be that, just call it state-owned lands and then describe down below. Property owner, if it's private, put a name in. If it's state, you can just put DEC. If it's your county, you can put Tompkins County. And then down here, we've just got contact information. Total acreage of the property doesn't have to be exact. You know, if you think it's 50 acres, but it's actually 56.95, we're not going to crumple up the application and toss it in the trash. So it's just kind of a generic. And then site description, you know, again, to the best of your abilities. And this is a good chance too for kind of like 4-H kids to learn a little bit more about their release site and kind of look at it. They can go out and do a field visit and you can say, oh, okay, yeah, it looks like it's about, you know, 25% wooded, 45% grasslands. And so just you do that. And same thing for ag land. You could put, you know, mixed ag field, 30 acres corn, 25 acres fallow field, anything like that. Percentage of birds, again, not exact. You know, if you're going to do 2 release sites and you think you're going to split them close to even, do 50-50. If it doesn't end up that at the end, not a big deal. So this WMU and town and county, that all auto-populates from when you pick the point on the map. This is just saying that, again, you've got property permission from the property owner, and then that you've got permission from them to share their contact information, because again, that will end up on a map later in the season. And then this is where you can load your form up. So you can snap a picture with the cell phone. If you don't have the ability to add it with the cell phone or anything like that, call either the local wildlife office or call us out at the farm. And even if you don't have a computer too, granted, I assume most, because we're on through WebEx that are listening, do have, but if by chance you don't, or you know somebody that doesn't have access to a computer, but they want to participate in the program, reach out to us at the game farm or through the local DEC office, and we'll take all the information over the phone with you, enter it into the application, and then we'll mail out that landowner consent form, and then you can just mail that back to us, and we'll make sure you guys get in the program like that. So one option that we have for folks, if you're in the Ithaca area or within driving distance, you're more than welcome to pick your chicks up at the farm. So you can just select yes or no here. You don't have to, but it's an option. And then just last but not least, they're going to end up putting a signature, a date, and that you've read and agreed to, kind of all the rules and stipulations of the program. And then you just click submit. When you hit submit, what should happen is it gives you a nice little confirmation and a brief explanation about what to expect next, which is going to be, it's going to go to regional DEC review. They're going to look over the application, call you if they have any questions on it or work any type of issues out. And then they'll forward those approved applications on to us at the game farm, and then we'll work to kind of fulfill those chick requests. So we hatch chicks out from April through June, and we do different routes across the state to deliver those chicks to all the way down on Long Island, to out in Buffalo, to up north of the Adirondacks. So depending on where you are in the state might denote when you're going to get those chicks. But we'll send a little information slip out to you, and we're going to try and do some email stuff as well this year, and try to give you 3 to 5 weeks lead time of when you can expect those chicks. And a lot of times you might meet us at a local post office or cooperative extension offices. A lot of those are still participating to kind of be chick distribution points. And then if you're a real funky outlier where, hey, you're up in, Plattsburgh and the only person up there and getting 30 chicks, well, it doesn't make much sense for us to send a truck and a guy all the way up there and back. So we're going to ship those chicks right in the United States Postal Service, right in the mail. And they'll just go next day priority to you, and you'll pick them up at your local post office the next day. We notify you and confirm that we sent them out in the mail, give you a tracking number, and go from there. And that works out pretty well. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of touch on a couple things too, and certainly if questions pop up, Erica, feel free to pop in and ask them to me. So like I said before, some of the common things that we see is picking in the pheasants, very prone to that. And it usually comes down to some form of stress to the birds. That can be overcrowding, too bright in the brooder house, not enough feeder drinker space. Sometimes it can be poor feed nutrition. Majority of feed we're getting out there is very, made to high standards and high quality mills. But sometimes there might be an instance of, hey, Uncle Joe had an old 50-pound bag of chick feed sitting in the back of his hen house for the last 10 years. Well, that can cause some issues, and the nutrients have broken down. There could be mold, things like that. So prevention is the best thing to really prevent the picking. Make sure that everything is as it should be. If picking does happen, you want to control it as quick as you can, because it can get out of hand fast. And so with that, I think you want to keep the birds busy. Usually not only are they stressed, but there's nothing to do but pick their brother or sister next door to them. So throwing a handful of cracked corn into the brooder house on the floor every day and give them something to pick at helps with that. I think CDs are a thing of the past at this point. So, if you got nothing else to do with your CDs around the house, just hang them in the hen house and the birds will peck at them. But, that's something that works really good too, because it's just something shiny that kind of gets the birds' attention. And that's one of the nice things actually with those nipple drinkers that you see for a lot of the birds, is it's actually more of inquisitive thing for the chicks to pick at that drinker and get the water. And so the CDs kind of do that same thing. It's just a flashy thing that interests the birds, and they're going to pick at that, and they might pick at each other a little bit less. And you can certainly take out like the worst of the birds. If there's a couple birds that are really getting picked on, separate them right out from the flock, put them in something separate, let them heal up for a day or two before they go back in. Disease or some other issues that we can certainly have. And if anybody just has had backyard poultry, they know that they are susceptible to getting sick. What we've got in this picture here is actually a young bird that was infected with coccidiosis. So even though our birds were on the amprolium and the medicated starter feed, they are still susceptible to, catching it. Conditions were right in our nursery this year that we had some issues with it. So if you guys can see my pointer, it's, and so down in my fingertips there, you can see the intestinal tract of the bird, and it's actually all wadded up with this kind of waxy white grayish substance. And so coccidiosis is a little protozoa that kind of attacks the intestinal tract of the bird and just causes a lot of distress and ends up making it so the bird can't absorb any nutrients and ends up kind of withering away. So signs of that are going to be, you might see bloody stools in the nursery, bloody piles of manure, because that distress to the intestinal tract causes some bleeding that the birds pass through. It can also lead, the birds will stop eating and drinking again, because they just don't feel good enough and they're not absorbing the nutrients from their feed, that they lose an interest in eating. And that's one of the more common things that you might see in the pheasants in young age. And that usually affects them from about 3 to 5 weeks. All birds typically have a level of coccidiosis in them. It's just when it gets out of hand that it becomes an issue. So when it does become an issue, you can reach out to your vets and try and get a script for something harder to treat it. Over-the-counter medication is Corid, which I think is just essentially a stronger dose of amprolium than what we get in our feed. But again, that's going to usually show between 3 to 5 weeks old. I kind of hit on a lot of the things with it there. Now, that's what's a good chance of what you'll run into when the birds are young. Now, when you get them out into the flight pen, there's kind of some different conditions that can affect them. And one of the ones that we typically see a lot is another form of parasite called gapeworm. And that's a small roundworm that actually infects the birds in their trachea. They pick it up by eating earthworms. Earthworms just kind of carrying it unbeknownst to them. It doesn't seem to affect them. And then upon ingestion, then the little cysts travel through the bird, end up lodging themselves into the trachea, and the bird's going to kind of just cough or gasp and shake their head. And it can be treated pretty easy with a lot of the dewormers out there. Safeguard is the one brand name that we use. That one's specifically for poultry, but if any of you folks out there are raising goats or dairy cows or sheep, a lot of times you'll come across that Safeguard as well in like a powder form. And before the poultry version was available, we'd use the other forms off label, and it's worked pretty well.
Evan, we have a couple of questions. Yeah. I don't know if you saw them. So can chickens and pheasants share a space, or is blackhead likely to occur?
I highly recommend against it. Kind of I like to try to keep any species as separate as we can, like we said there with, blackhead and issues like that. Certainly with avian influenza, which I'm going to get into in a minute, that is a pretty big concern. It's a lot more easily transmitted with waterfowl. So if you have ducks, you definitely don't want to raise them in conjunction with your pheasants. But yeah, I always recommend trying to keep any bird species just separate from one another.
So we had another question. I think they mean for themselves, can they incubate pheasant eggs that our pheasants lay before we release them?
So your pheasants that you're going to release, they won't be in egg production yet. So they're not going to start to lay eggs. Let's say you received chicks this spring. They wouldn't lay eggs until the following spring. So if they were to lay them this fall, it would be kind of a little bit too late towards winter. So their bodies kind of naturally know not to start producing until the next year.
Then another question, can they use diatomaceous earth to remove parasites from the pheasants?
Yeah, there's certainly been some folks that have had some good success with that. Pheasants they can get like a little louse on them. I've never seen it get as bad as what you see in like some chickens where you have some lice issues. It's usually just kind of occurring in low numbers and doesn't affect the bird and never seems to get out of hand. But diatomaceous earth, I've heard good things about it. We've never used it much around here. When I raised poultry on my own previously, I'd usually have like a little dust bath spot with the diatomaceous earth in it, just to help with some of the lice and things like that on just standard poultry. So having that available to your birds, I think certainly could be worth it.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Oh, is it okay to have them on a farm with ducks as long as the pheasants don't come into contact with the ducks?
Yeah, yep, it's okay. I would just, like you said, do your best to kind of separate them out. And even some of the things you can do is just your order of operations of taking care of those, all your farm animals, maybe visit the pheasants first before you go to the ducks instead of going to the ducks and then to the pheasants, so you don't track anything over to them.
Can I just reiterate what you're saying? Just for anyone that has done this before, or 4-H educators that are on, that application that Evan was showing us is for everybody this year. So that is the big change. 4-Hers and 4-H families, that's how you have to apply this year for the birds, is through that application process.
Yep. Yeah. So just like Erica said, everyone will do their own application. And then, certainly if it's a young 4-H or something, have a parent close by, or set up something maybe with your educator if they're willing to sit down and work through that application with you. With that, if you happen to come out and notice a real swollen face, discharge from the eyes, paralyzed birds, your birds were fine the day before and you go out and half of them are dead the next day, that could be signs of some real troublesome diseases, Newcastle disease, avian influenza. And with that, you want to reach out to your local poultry veterinarian, New York State Ag and Markets. It's not something that, don't be worried that you don't want to call them because you're afraid your flock's going to get, cold or anything. It's a big disease that can cause a lot of damage on a big scale. So we do want to control it. And some of these diseases, mortality rates are so high that all those birds are going to end up getting lost anyways. So you definitely want to report it. Predators, I spoke mostly on this before in just flight pens and keeping everything tight, but it is an issue, especially any guys that raise chickens, things like to eat birds. And that doesn't just stop at chickens, it's pheasants too. Typically what we run into, raccoon, mink, fox, always just try to keep them out. If you have electric close by, if you have cattle or an old fence charger that you can get a hands on, that's the best. Just run a narrow band of electric around the base of the pen, and that keeps a lot out. But when stuff gets in, you may need to end up trapping that to remove it. And those pests you can take out, they're going to come back because they've learned that, hey, there's an easy meal there. Hawks and owls, you've got the flight netting on top, and they're not running. The pheasants aren't running free range like your chickens. So hawks and owls typically aren't a big issue. And there's a little mink that we caught right in the act. Yeah, he's kind of muddy, so he almost looks like a rat, but he's got a little pheasant right there he was trying to drag out, and they can cause some trouble for their cute little size. Rodents. So again, if you guys have had chickens, you might have had rodent issues in the past. Same can happen with pheasants. And even if you hadn't had birds, you should know that this is a possibility. So you want to keep your feed tidy. Try not to overfeed the birds. If they have something that they can get in and scratch it out, just feed them enough to get them through each day so you don't have extra waste. If you're going to control them, really recommend traps over the use of rat poisons and things like that. So we make a little wooden shoebox with a hole that's big enough for a rat, but not big enough for a pheasant. Put the trap in there with some peanut butter and birdseed, and usually you've got them the next day. The reason we don't like rat poisons is that other things can eat it, and it's just as poisonous to them. Dogs, cats, kids. We've found too on our facility that in the presence of a lot of delicious pheasant food, the rodents don't really care about rat poison pellets. They don't taste nearly as delightful as our feed, so it doesn't even work that good. Additionally, you can poison other wildlife inadvertently when they eat a rodent that was poisoned by some pellets that you put out. So I pretty much hit on all this stuff, so we don't really need to go in that. The big thing is just, hey, to get to that release or to that application, just Google search it, pops right up, fill in all the fields. And certainly if you have any questions on it, always do not hesitate to reach out for some assistance on it. Again, I went through that. It's going to get reviewed by the local staff. They'll reach out to you, and then we're going to work with you to get you those chicks. Delivery, again, I kind of spoke to you on that, on how we'll get those out to you. You can pick them up at the farm. We'll deliver them to CCE offices. We might have some folks meet just like in a local post office parking lot or grocery store parking lot. And the chicks are going to come in those cardboard boxes. The box that they come in is a box that you can take home and transport them with. We get that question a lot. Do I need to bring something to pick up the chicks? And nope, we don't. And this little picture here, that was actually, I got to one of my stops for delivering chicks, and he was standing right there just kind of looking at me like, I don't know if he was happy he escaped or wanted to get back in, but it made for a pretty cool little picture. And that is, that's one of our laying hutches. Underneath one of the laying hutches in the springtime. We pick eggs about 4 times a day. So that was probably in between the 10 o'clock and the 12 o'clock pick. And so yeah, eggs stack up pretty quick out here. But another thing too I want to throw out is that we love doing tours here at the farm. So if whether it's 4-H group within counties or just individuals with families or sportsman clubs, reach out to us at the farm, set something up, and we can take you around and show you how we do it around here.